Mr. Mirel, thank you very much for joining me today and sharing your time with us.
It's my pleasure.
Mr. Mirel, before we start talking about the European perspective for the Western Balkans, may I ask you, in the last months of the last year, there were tensions between Kosovo and Serbia, all related to a part of the agreements in the dialogue. Can you tell me, how can this situation be read from the European perspective?
Well, maybe it would be a bit presumptuous for me to talk, about the European perspective, but at least what I can offer is my own perspective as a European citizen, having retired now from the Commission some 9 years ago. And in that context, I would like to make 3 remarks, which I think are important to understand how the EU reads the situation. The first remark is that the European Union is very much attached to 2 basic principles, which in a sense form what I would call its very essence. One is dialogue, and the second one is, finding compromises whenever there are problems. It was first for the EU in a historical perspective to overcome, in particular between France and Germany. But then nowadays, whenever there are difficulties, the first sort of reaction from Council, Commission, etc., the first reaction is to enter into a dialogue, to find compromises to any problem. And therefore, and that's my second remark, the Commission and the Council really hate sudden unilateral decisions before there is a dialogue or an attempt to resolve the issues, not just between members of the EU, but also between the closest partners of the EU, and in particular those who aspire to become members of the club. I have been over the past years, I think, very much considered as a friend of Kosovo. But honestly, I must say that these days I've been rather surprised by the unilateral decisions taken regarding the car plates, right? Because not only such unilateral decisions increase the difficulties, but also, in a sense, they can ruin the little, how should I say, the little confidence that over the past years has been created between Pristina and the north of Kosovo, in particular through the dialogue. And what is worse, and this is where I'm worried, is that when such decisions are strongly resisted, cannot be implemented, and therefore have to be either abandoned or postponed, it's even worse, because then it affects the credibility of the authorities, which have taken these measures. And then restoring afterwards calm, confidence becomes extremely difficult. So this is how I see it.
But Mr. Mirel, tensions appear to have arisen in an attempt to establish governance in the north. From a so-called dual sovereignty, Pristina is demanding more control, but Belgrade does not give up. We are in a limbo. So then what solution have been considered in the EU during this last decade about this issue?
Well, I would say that since the start of the dialogue, which was, you may remember, called technical dialogue in 2011, when I was part of it, actually, Kosovo and Serbia, under this dialogue, have managed to agree on a great number of issues. To do what? Well, in the first sort of step, to facilitate the citizens' daily life, right? And some important agreements have been entered into, such as on telecommunications, on energy, and free movement of people, at least before the recent problem. And this has started to create, some kind of trust and confidence in the process, including through a very important part of the agreement, the April 2013, so-called Brussels Agreement, which included the Association of Serb Municipalities. So in my view, although this is still a question I have, isn't it that the non-implementation of what was agreed in 2013, I mean, at least the important part, the Association of Serb Municipalities, isn't it the non-implementation of that started to create mistrust? I think it is, actually.
But Mr. Mirel, the crisis in the north escalated in particular after Russia's aggression in Ukraine, with Belgrade not yet decided to join the EU in sanctions against Russia. So if there is no quick European solution, can we return to a situation of not a so distant past?
Well, it is true that escalation has increased since the Russian aggression in Ukraine. But there have been, my memory is not that weak, there have been other crises well before Russia's aggression in Ukraine, including, if my memory serves me well, including by the erection of barricades. So this is unfortunate these days. And it's, it has become very, very tense, but this is not for the first time. And in a sense, I think whatever the relations of Serbia with Russia, with China, there are elements to be considered here in terms of Serbia-EU relations. Trade integration, more or less around 70%, meaning that export-imports of Serbia go primarily for 70% to the European market, not to Russia or China. Second, the investments in Serbia are, for most of them, I don't know, I think it's 80%, but I'm not sure, come from EU member state companies. And third, the EU is the biggest donor of assistance to Serbia. So, taking these elements into account, I cannot believe that there would be a return to a tragic past. I'm not saying there is no tense situation today. Clearly there is. But at least I don't believe the bad omen saying, we risk of going back to the tragic past.
But the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia has been going on for more than a decade. When the EU took responsibility from UN for the dialogue, why didn't frame it? Why didn't schedule it? Why didn't manage to conclude it with a legally binding agreement?
But at the beginning of the dialogue, there was kind of a understanding that one should start with practical issues that would help daily life of the citizens, very much in line with the UN General Assembly's resolution that talks about, creating, helping life of daily life of citizens. So that was the idea, to have the two parties under the facilitation of the EU agreeing on these issues that would help moving forward to more difficult issues and leading to what the EU has called officially a legally binding agreement. I agree though, and I regret that there has not been more sort of monitoring of implementation of these agreements, not just monitoring, but in a sense, fixing more quickly what had been agreed. In particular, addressing, diverging views between both countries. After a few weeks or few months after an agreement was made in Brussels, there should have been more action to ensure that implementation would follow and in good faith. So by letting the situation on some issues, being in a sense rotting, trust was affected, and more importantly, maybe credibility of the citizens in, let's say, the merits of the dialogue.
So, Mr. Mirel, we see today the stagnation of the dialogue due to the different circumstances, and specifically about the insistence of implementation of some of the agreement. One of them is association of the Serb majority municipalities in Kosovo. But let me ask you, where is the solution to this? An NGO or a autonomy for the Serbs in the northern part?
I wish I would be able to deliver, a solution that would be suitable to both sides. But first, that's an very important agreement. That was an important agreement in 2013, confirmed in 2015. Second, it's been ratified by the Kosovo Assembly by two-thirds majority. And it has become, therefore, an international obligation, as the envoy from the US recently recalled. And the Constitutional Court in Pristina has clearly confirmed that it should be established. But I agree it's a difficult issue. It's, there's a difficult balance to be found between, on the one side, giving to this association enough power sharing, so to speak, a power sharing mechanism for providing the guarantees that the Serb community is looking for in education, healthcare, social welfare, and the economy. So on that on the one side, and on the other side, avoiding that any decision coming from this association would affect the state functioning, Kosovo state functioning. So there's a difficult balance to be found, certainly, in between these two elements and principles. But until now, what really worries me is that Pristina has refused it as a matter of principle. Linking that to full recognition of Kosovo by Serbia. So I think it's high time to look at ways to implement it with flexibility. Flexibility in what sense? Well, for instance, looking at the needs of municipalities in the north, which may be slightly different from municipalities in other parts of Kosovo, and in particular in the south. They may have different needs. But also, there may be different competencies to be looked at, depending on the issues between education and economy, for instance. Economy is certainly a major stumbling block. So what I would suggest is that, there should be a group of lawyers in good faith discussing the various alternatives, the various possibilities. And actually, there are some NGOs which have already looked at that and have provided, not solutions, but have said, it could be a bit more on this or a bit less on that, again, depending on competencies, depending on geographical location of municipalities. So I think it's really high time to do that work through a working group. That would, I hope, restore confidence. And that should be an important element of the dialogue in the coming weeks and months.
If I understand well, that means that you suggest that the association start being implemented before the final agreement between Kosovo and Serbia.
Before, yes, in the sense that for me, it would help the final agreement to be reached. Definitely, that would be a very important element. And that was the idea in 2013, wasn't it? So I think it's very important to move in a very pragmatic manner, again, in the European spirit of looking for a compromise between different positions, taking into account the interest of the Serb municipalities, but also of the Kosovo state, to avoid that this association would, in a sense, jeopardize the state functioning.
But then, Mr. Mirel, how to convince Belgrade to recognize Kosovo after the implementation of the association?
I have maybe specific views on that question. I think if it looks at least almost impossible today for Belgrade to recognize, fully recognize in international terms, the Republic of Kosovo. So my view is that maybe the time has come for moving into stages. And in a sense, officially until now, at least, unless I have missed something, the EU official position until now, I'm not saying of some member states may have different views, but the EU official position is that there should be a legally binding agreement that would ensure normalization, that would ensure that Kosovo could join international organizations, that would facilitate lives of citizens, etc. And, very important point, that would also facilitate the recognition of Kosovo by the 5 non-recognizers. So I would plead for that step in the first place, and as a second, which would lead to, enjoying benefits of great benefits of accession, and in a second step, at the very end of possibly a longer process, full recognition would come at the time of fully joining the EU.
So what I understand, Mr. Mirel, is that you are saying that 5 non-recognizers should first do it before reaching the final agreement. So recognizing Kosovo by 5 non-recognizers.
Well, the 5 recognizers, it's kind of vicious circle here, right? Because the 5 need progress. They need to see progress between Kosovo and Serbia for changing their position. So if there would be sufficient progress through, for instance, implementation of the ASM, through also a very important issue, at least for some non-recognizers which are Orthodox, to find a solution to the Dechani monastery problem, right? So if there would be sufficient progress, I guess the 5 could rally a deal on a legally binding agreement between the two, even before full recognition is considered. That would be the very first step, and I think they would certainly agree if a legally binding agreement is found between the two countries. I guess the 5 non-recognizers would join the agreement.
So let me ask you, Mr. Mirel, until the end, so until the final agreement, are we talking about something that is called as the look-alike two Germanys, or solution of two Germanys?
Maybe this is a solution that was actually mentioned long time ago. But for me, it fits more into what I call, irrespective, beyond the Kosovo-Serbia issue, what I call accession to the EU in stages. This is what some of us are pleading for these days, which is, taking the new methodology a bit forward in saying, all right, to move towards a very demanding accession process, let's start stage by stage, joining first, for instance, the internal market, which would be very profitable for all the Western Balkan countries, for Kosovo as well, joining the internal market, and then gradually implementing the very demanding EU legislation. And during that stage process, the countries would be granted what is normally reserved for post-accession countries, what we call the structural funds, etc., which would help in refurbishing hospitals, developing education, network connections, energy, transport, and etc. An accession in stages that would reach the stage where a country would have almost entirely incorporated EU legislation into its own legal order, would then be potentially member, but would be deprived from veto rights in the Council until it becomes a full member. And in between the two stages, then the final recognition, in that case, of Kosovo by Serbia could intervene. That's the way some of us see that process.
You are mentioning the new methodology in the European Union, but I would like to ask you, isn't this, so to speak, a process, a quite a long process that you are advocating today? Is it going to bring closer or far away the Western Balkans to the European Union?
Well, I agree with you. It would be a long process, but this is why I'm pleading for a stage accession, step by step. Let's start, if there was an agreement to start with the joining the internal market, the benefits would be huge for the economy of all the countries. It goes beyond Kosovo and Serbia issue. It concerns all the countries. And then moving forward in step 2, 3, 4, to, once major reforms are undertaken, then the financial support would be increased gradually. So helping the countries also in developing the economy, in developing services, public services for the citizens. It may well be a process as long as the normal accession process, but at least the benefits, or some of the benefits of accession, would be provided before accession itself. And this is what the European Council hinted at in June last year, and again in December. There is a sentence in which the European Council is precisely asking the Commission to reflect on how to make sure that some benefits of accession could be provided before accession itself through this step-by-step process.
Let me go back to the agreement or final settlement between Kosovo and Serbia. Is it too realistic or too optimistic to expect that this agreement would be reached this year?
Oh, I don't have a crystal ball, frankly, and I've been too far away from the ground, let's say, to be able to. I would hope so, but frankly, I don't know. I hope, but that's all I can say.
And let me ask you, Mr. Mirel, sometimes there is a perception that Balkan leaders see European perspective or European integration as for granted. Do you agree to it?
I do agree. In a sense, they are right, because there have been promises, since 2000, then Thessaloniki 2003. There have been promises. It's also in the deep interest of the EU itself, from a security, stability point of view. But the point is that they, in a sense, tend to see it for granted a bit too much. What I mean is that, they commit themselves to undertaking major reforms, etc. Many words, but deeds, it's another story. So I think more effort certainly should be undertaken. And again, efforts undertaken in the context of what I mentioned before, the stage accession, whereby more funding would come and help the countries, is probably, I think, not probably, in my view it is, a way to speed up the process and make sure that reforms are undertaken for joining the EU.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. That was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks a lot.